Hi there, my name's Lucy Dodds and I'm a content marketing consultant at Evolved Search, an SEO and content marketing agency in Newcastle upon Tyne. We are search specialists, particularly for the automotive, retail and finance sectors, and working across these different sectors among my time at other agencies and in-house. I have learned a lot about on-site content. I love looking at anything written on page, understanding search intent, and creating genuine human content. So that brings me to this talk today on improving EAT through that on-site content, and that's namely your expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So, what is EAT? For those who aren't familiar, the term comes from Google's search quality guidelines, used by search quality raters when reviewing websites and their pages to understand if they have some kind of beneficial purpose. If your site has no beneficial purpose and doesn't attempt to help users, or worse, it attempts to harm them, then you would receive a low rating. And to make this decision, the raters consider the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of the author, the content, plus the site as a whole. So, okay, why should you care? I've seen a lot of debate on EAT and how useful it is because it's not measurable. You can't see an EAT score. You can't do a direct action and expect your EAT to improve. So in that sense, it's not a ranking factor. But in my opinion, that shouldn't matter when we are trying to think about how we can truly benefit users. I try not to think about ranking factors very much for content at all. Instead, my priority is to create something that is genuinely helpful. And in my experience, you can achieve a lot when EAT is part of your long-term strategy. So, for one obvious reason that I just mentioned, it's in Google guidelines, which I think anyone working in SEO would be paying attention to. The guidelines say that there is high EAT pages and websites of all types. So the most obvious ones are referred to Your Money or Your Life sites, or YMYL, which basically means anyone in a health and finance space. But it also makes reference to things like gossip websites, or there's fashion websites, for example, that they would all have some kind of level of EAT. So someone's going to have higher expertise necessary for some kind of websites, like finance, for example, and someone would need less formal expertise. But both of these are still important. Another reason that I think EAT is beneficial, which you might be a bit more interested in, is improved performance. So on the sites that I have worked with who have targeted EAT as part of their strategy, have seen improved rankings, sessions and conversions, but I will touch on that a little bit more later. And finally, I think looking at EAT helps you to future-proof your content strategy. I believe EAT will be important for many and not just those YMYL sites, because ultimately you are trying to get someone to buy a product or service, and they are making a commitment to your site, which usually involves spending money at some point. So even if it's not a lot, it's still that commitment. And not to mention that if they are buying online, the users will be sharing bank details and other sensitive info. So as a result, they need to trust you. And finally, why just on-site content? Okay, so EAT is not just one action, it's not just one thing that we can do. There are multiple methods, like building authoritative links. You could invest in a secure checkout. And while these tips are important, they can be a slower process if you have a small team or a low budget. And so the tips that I'm going to talk about can normally be actioned by just one person, so just the content creator you might have in-house, and they shouldn't have an impact on a development backlog or your external costs. So without further ado, I'll get started. Okay, number one, reassess product descriptions. So I'm going to talk about our client, Ocean Finance, who faced a significant visibility drop after a Google update in January 2020. which we believe was partially because of the way their products were described, which did not make the site appear as trustworthy as we would want for a YMYL site. So, in particular, the rankings and traffic for their bad credit cards product page had dropped. This is the first thing that we noticed, and we saw that there was some keyword stuffing on that page for bad credit cards. But the keyword stuffing wasn't site-wide, so we didn't feel that it could have had impacted their visibility on such a large scale. So what was the problem? We also noticed that other product pages that targeted bad credit, such as bad credit loans, had dropped in a similar way. And they didn't have as such a strong example of keyword stuffing. So we looked a little bit more at competitors to see who had won and who had lost from this core update. And our research indicated that Google was being extremely careful with Ocean Finance's product itself. So obviously anyone with a bad credit history might be more likely to get into debt, and they could be putting themselves at risk. We don't want our client site to give the wrong message that they were targeting anyone who could put themselves into a bad situation with their finances. So we removed the heavy focus on bad credit throughout the site, using synonyms or removing some content altogether. And we saw the uplift around May. Their visibility started to improve again, and it's continued to rise throughout the rest of the year. So yes, you could just say that this was some simple keyword stuffing, and yes, it was, but we believe it's more than that. We think that Ocean Finance's visibility drop was turned around by recommending a more genuine approach to these product descriptions, rather than targeting one keyword which could appear harmful. Now, this is important for YMYL sites, of course, but I would encourage you to look at your product descriptions, even if you aren't, because you are still asking someone to commit to your offering, like I'd mentioned before, and in doing so, they're usually going to be making a financial decision and spending money. So, how can we do that? Have you used the same keywords that deliberately target selling the product, as opposed to just explaining about it? Have you maybe written your product descriptions with a human approach instead, and you're going to be helping the user to make that right decision? Have you used synonyms to describe your product, which can obviously reduce keyword stuffing anyway, but it also helps your user to understand what it means? A bad credit card is kind of vague, but in conjunction with phrases like poor credit, less than perfect credit, it doesn't sound as negative and harmful. It sounds like something you can build on. And the user gets a better idea of what it means and if it's the right financial product for them. So overall, that they will trust you more, and this naturally leads to a conversion. And number 2 is add product questions. So you can take your product content one step further by adding some helpful questions to your pages, which will make the buyer's decision process easier. But what's also important is I believe that this adds a further layer of expertise and trust to your site, because you are giving the user your specialist knowledge in a certain area that they don't know well. So if you can do this without appearing self-serving, then it appears trustworthy too. So let's look at a site which I think does this very well, which is the AA. They have a used cars section, and obviously buying a car is a big financial commitment that the everyday person might not know much about. So when buying an A1, see how the AA shows an easy to understand list of features to make the decision easier. But it's not jammed with CTAs or buttons to make me believe that they've produced this content to force the user to buy right now. And instead, they're letting them make an informed decision. And the expertise and trust of the AA site is even more clear to me in this part of the A1 buying page. So the users here aren't just looking to buy a car, they're looking to buy a used car, which can cause concern. Will the car run after 6 months? Will the aircon or the windows work properly? But the AA has addressed used car concerns for this model specifically, providing information that only a mechanic or a car expert would know. So the fact that these aren't general maintenance questions and they aren't about cars generally. They are specific to a used A1. And this really focuses on the user's original search intent, which is, should I buy a used A1? And I think that really improves their EAT. So how would you find these questions? Most of these I would find through keyword research. I personally like to use tools from Searchmetrics and SEMrush, but I also find useful ones through People Also Ask and related questions in the SERPs, which are free. So once you've found those specific questions, just remember the key thing, I guess, is to avoid being self-serving, be genuine, provide that expert answer, and make yourself part of a long-term buying process, especially if someone needs to research your product a lot before committing, like a car or a credit card. Number 3, bring in experts. So to show the expertise of your site authors, you should have real authors with bios that are linked to from a team page, like in this example here from our client, Drench. This is particularly important for YMYL sites to show the credentials of a person behind the content, but I think it's valuable for other sites too. I think I touched on it earlier, but Google search quality guidelines say that some topics require less formal expertise. These may be considered experts in topics where they have life experience, like in this Drench example, where the author is personally interested in interior design and actually likes to read about bathroom trends. So this shows that this author has more everyday expertise, which still builds trust for the user, because not a lot of people would know about the latest in bathroom design. So we've seen a lot of this before, and more sites seem to be taking this approach now. But then some clients have come to me and they've asked, well, what do we do when our authors don't have that formal expertise, and it's necessary for the content we want to produce for our audience? Then what do we do? So my recommendation for this is where you would bring in experts who are more qualified to produce the content. So my example for this one is going to be our other client, who is Mattress Online. So you can see here that they have the author bios and team pages shown. They demonstrate their everyday expertise on sleep topics, but it came to their attention that their audience was seeking some advice on a medical topic related to sleep, which really only a qualified expert should provide. So instead of providing untrustworthy content, or simply taking information from another source, Mattress Online decided to partner with a qualified sleep expert, who is the CEO of the sleep charity. This CEO has a much more authoritative profile after contributing to a number of sleep and health articles throughout reputable organisations. So you could simply get this authority to review your work, as many sites do label their content as expert reviewed. But I would recommend actually adding that specialist to your author bios, just to add that additional layer of trust. So, because to me that shows the expert didn't just read over someone else's content, they actually wrote it. So you know they've had to personally research and add their professional knowledge, and it wasn't just taken from another source. Okay, and number 4 is create a guide hub. So one crucial part in creating content that will help contribute to your EAT would be creating guides or advice content to inform users who are researching your service and have questions. Know that these questions aren't necessarily the product-specific ones that I mentioned earlier. They are much broader sometimes, and the search intent may be nowhere near a conversion. But improving your EAT shouldn't be about those short-term goals. In fact, I have found users read advice pages and return to the site to convert 90 days later. But without those guides, would they have converted at all? Now, I could talk about this kind of content for a lot longer than 15 minutes, and I'll be delivering some more information on this in the future, so watch out on my Twitter page for an update. But I couldn't also talk about EAT and improving that through on-site content without mentioning a guide hub, so I'm just going to run you through some key elements. So take a look at our client Tap Warehouse, who has built a hub of how-to guides which relate to the products they sell. So notice that this section covers a lot of questions which aren't pushing the conversion, and in fact some of them are post-purchase questions. But this contributes to the idea that this site's authors are willing to create content that isn't for a completely self-serving reason. They'll continue to help you whether you buy their product or not, and won't ignore the user after the purchase is complete. And I believe this makes their site look a lot more trustworthy because they clearly care about the users and show this through their detailed on-site content. There's a lot more that I could say about this topic. Like I say, it won't fit into 15 minutes. And I do want to talk about this more for things like URL structure, UX features for a great guide hub, tracking your performance, and things like that. But this talk is focusing on what you can achieve with just the on-site content alone. So if that sounds like you, if maybe you have a smaller budget, or if you just have one person in your content team who wants to focus on this, here are the key things that I would look at. So first, I'll start by researching questions around the product or service using keyword tools. People also ask, buyer personas, customer inquiries, find those pain points and address them with content. These aren't always explicit in questions exactly either, so you'll find ones like pros and cons of my product, and that's not written as a question. But if you think about the intent, the user is still asking you for the advantages and disadvantages of what you offer. Next, I would say make sure you create guides that aren't self-serving and know how to match that search intent. Sometimes users will be closer to converting, sometimes they won't. You need to find this out, and I can only suggest doing this manually really where possible to make sure you produce humanized content which makes you appear more trustworthy. And once you know the questions you're going to answer, I would create a brief to help structure that content. So this is before any of your real writing begins and having any true expertise added to the post. Just because this is where you're going to be looking at what competitors do, comparing title tags, looking at featured snippets, and seeing what you're going to include. And finally, minimize outsourcing. So my final advice for improving your EAT through on-site content is to minimize outsourcing. This should be good news for those who have a smaller budget or fewer in-house writers to help content production. You don't need the outsourcing, you already have the tools in-house with your own team. But this can be a hard sell to those who need to outsource because their focus is creating lots of content, like those guides I mentioned. So the process might be, let's create 20 pages and be done. But you should know that improving EAT, it's like I said, it's not one job. It can't be ticked off in any to-do list. It should be a constant factor of your digital strategy. And if that means that it's going to take more time to produce the content to an expert level, then that's okay. And let me explain why. So first, let's look at some of the questions used by Google to assess the EAT of content. I've taken this from a really helpful Google Doc created by SEO consultant Aleda Solis. And if you don't have a copy, let me know and I'll share that with you too. So these questions are asking, is the content mass-produced or outsourced to a large number of creators or spread across a large network of sites so that the individual pages or sites don't get as much attention or care? My other one that I chose was, is this content written by an expert or enthusiast who demonstrably knows the topic well? And finally, was the content produced well, or does it appear sloppy or hastily produced? So in my experience, outsourcing unfortunately does lead to a lower level of expertise, not because they are bad freelance writers, but because they haven't dedicated years of their working life or personal interests to this particular topic. So of course I would expect an in-house content team to conduct research and use information from elsewhere, but they will have a greater understanding of that research and so should be in a better position to produce expert content simply because they have a natural knowledge that's built over time. So trust that you don't need to push out the content that we've talked about at a really rapid pace. You don't always need to spend excessive time and money when you already have that authoritative in-house voice. But I wouldn't say that without evidence, so let's take a look at two different sites who are in a similar space and therefore producing comparable content. So this is Site 1, who has much more authority from its strong link profile, but when it comes to its guide content, it has been outsourced. You can tell that there are multiple writers due to the different styles, the different layers of knowledge that people have. And in my opinion, this makes the content appear much less trustworthy. And we can see that the guide section in particular on Site 1 receive around 4,000 sessions a month, which we're going to compare to Site 2. Site 2 has much less authority, much fewer high quality links, and they have a small in-house writing team, and they do not outsource any on-site content. They have instead put their years of expertise into writing guides, and I believe it shows with, again, this is just their guide hub, having writing sessions going up to 20,000 in 1 month. So bearing in mind the difference between these two sites in other areas of SEO, like links and tech, then I personally believe that it's Site 2's guides perform much better because of the commitment that they have made to building expertise, rather than maybe spending a lot of money to get it done quickly. And that's it. That's 5 ways to improve your EAT through on-site content. That's reassessing your product descriptions, adding tailored questions to those product descriptions, bringing in experts if you don't have the qualifications yourself, creating a guide hub that isn't self-serving, and minimizing your outsourcing to make sure you're using the trustworthy tools that you have in-house. We know that there are a lot of other ways to build your EAT, like I mentioned, links and getting mentions from authoritative sites, but these tips might be useful if you have a lower budget or if you have a small team. Okay, and that's that. I hope you found this talk useful, and if you have any questions, then please find me on Twitter at LucyAliceDodds. We can chat more because I really like to learn about on-site content and improving EAT. If there's anything you want to share, then I'd love to see it. Keep an eye out for a future talk on building guide hubs over the next few months. And until then, thanks for watching.